Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So good morning to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Amber Young from the US. Good afternoon to everyone joining from Europe and UK, and a very good evening to everyone joining from India and South Asia. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you again. Today is our 12th seminar in the seminar series, The Digital Future for Business and Society, Perspectives on Artificial Intelligence Challenges and Opportunities. This entire seminar series is hosted jointly by Professor Yogesh Dwivedi. Professor Yogesh Dwivedi is a professor of digital marketing and innovation, founding director of the Emerging Markets Research Center, and co-director of research at the School of Management, Swansea University, Wales, UK. Our co-host for today is Dr. Raman, Director, SIBM Pune, that's Symbiosis Institute of Business Management Pune, and Dean, Faculty of Management at Symbiosis International University, based in Pune in India. This seminar series is supported by lots of entities. Allow me to share them with you. The Center for Technology, Innovation, Management and Enterprise, the University of Kent, UK, Digital Marketing and Analytics Special Industry Group, Academy of Marketing, Grenoble, IE Graduate School of Management, which is a Grenoble INP school of the University of Grenoble Arts, Swansea iLab, Innovation Lab at Swansea University, the E-Business and E-Government Special Industry Group at the British Academy of Management, and the UK Academy for Information Systems. To give you some details about this seminar series, this has actually been inspired by various perspectives on artificial intelligence and its transformative potential as presented in a recent perspective article by Dwivedi et al. 2019. AI undoubtedly offers a transformative potential for the augmentation and potential replacement of human tasks and activities within a wide range of industrial, intellectual, and social applications. The pace of change for this new AI technological age is staggering, with new breakthroughs in algorithmic machine learning and autonomous decision-making, creating new opportunities for continued innovation. The impact of AI could be significant, with industries and sectors ranging from agriculture, finance, healthcare, manufacturing, retail, supply chain, logistics, utilities, all potentially disrupted by the onset of AI technologies. The seminar series on the digital future for business and society, perspectives on AI challenges and opportunities, presents various perspectives from a series of distinguished speakers all over the world to highlight the opportunities and challenges posed by the rapid emergence of AI. Allow me now to introduce our speaker for today. Our speaker for today is Dr. Amber Young, who is Director of the ISIS PhD program and Assistant Professor of Information Systems at the Sam Walton College of Business, University of Arkansas. Sam Walton is, of course, the founder of the largest retail company of the world in the same name. Dr. Amber Young's research focuses on how organizations can design and implement technologies for social good and human empowerment. She is concerned with the effects of technology on individuals' humanity and dignity. Dr. Young's work has been published in top journals such as MIS Quarterly, Journal of Management Information Systems Journal, and Information and Organization. She's on the editorial board of Information and Organization. Today, Dr. Amber Young will talk to us about building an emancipatory future for workers and machines. Dr. Amber, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you guys having me, and I'm really excited to be here today. Let me just share my screen. How does that look?
Perfect.
Great. So I'll just go ahead and jump right in, start out with a little bit of background. So as you know, machine learning and all types of artificial intelligence tools are infiltrating the workplace now. We see this in the form of self-driving transport vehicles, airplane autopilots, financial fraud monitoring systems, stock trading bots, just to name a few. And currently, machine learning tools are more common on social media than they are in the workplace. But we see that on social media, there are quite a lot of problems happening, right? We see human agency subverted, and we see all kinds of negative societal impacts. And so scholars have warned that the development of artificial intelligence, and in particular machine learning tools, has really outpaced the development of ethical design rules for these systems. So what we ask in this research is, how can we preemptively design socio-technical systems to avoid negative outcomes and then to achieve positive outcomes for workers who will partner with machine learning tools in future workplaces? So as we're thinking about the future, we need to identify first what we're trying to avoid and what we're trying to organize against, and then also what we're trying to achieve and what we want to organize for. So this research is part of a stream of research that I'm working on with some co-authors, and this paper is with Anne Myshak and Jerry Kane, and we have another paper at MISQ also with Sam Rensbotham, where we talk about this concept of infomania, and we outline a dystopian future that we believe the current trajectory of machine learning adoption is leading to. So, sorry, when I share, you guys just see the PDF, right? Oh, okay, sorry about that. So in that paper, we define infomania as a dystopian future state where ubiquitous data collection feeds machine learning models that users do not understand and that lack user feedback, resulting in behavioral control of humans. So this is an analogy or a foil against which we can make decisions. So imagining this future where machine learning tools dominate and subjugate workers helps us formulate examples of what we want to avoid. Or as Charles Kettering said, a problem well stated is half solved. So creating this idea of an infomania state where things are very oppressive and machine learning tools have really taken over helps us think about what we don't want to happen. And then we can think about what we do want to happen. So for every dark potential, there exists also the possibility for a brighter future if workers and machine learning tools are organized and that relationship is managed in an ethical and appropriate way. So thinking about how that should be done in the normative way to do this, we turn to emancipatory theories to understand how gradients of emancipation can be achieved in these work partnerships and what that would look like. So our objective was to develop a normative organizing theory for the organization of human and machine learning partnerships in a future workplace. And we approached this in much the same way that you would approach a design theory. So organizing theory is relatively less common. So we decided to take a design theory approach to organizing the socio-technical system instead of designing an information system. And we chose a kernel theory that is Paulo Freire's theory of emancipatory pedagogy. This is a critical social theory, so it provides normative guidance for converting oppressive societal or relationship characteristics or dynamics into emancipatory ones. But unlike most critical theories, this theory is actionable because it does settle for gradients of emancipation. There are theories of emancipation or liberation that just say, you know, it's this abstract ideal, we can't get there, and there's not a concrete achievable strategy for reaching a better state. But Freire really offers more concrete guidance. And this is a pedagogical theory, which is important because machine learning tools are capable of learning. So we thought it best to apply a theory of learning, a theory of education about how you could accomplish emancipation through a learning process. So if you're very familiar with emancipatory theories, you probably know that most of the emancipatory theories in information systems do come from the Frankfurt School and are based on Habermas. And relatively few theories rely on ideas coming out of the global South. And so that's something unique about this theory, is that it's based on the work of Paulo Freire when he was living in Brazil. And we agree with some recent work in JIT that says that if we rely on Habermas and the Frankfurt School in all of our critical research, then we're going to have gaps in our understanding. There are other perspectives and other ways of looking at things. And so certainly there are ways that Habermas's work could be used similarly to come up with organizing theories or to come up with strategies for emancipation. But the reason we chose Freire for this work, which is something that the reviewers had asked us to really think through and justify, and that happened when we were submitting to MIS Quarterly too, is that we really think that there is value in taking a more concrete approach, something that's different and something that settles for better, even if perfect isn't achievable. So let me tell you more about the kernel theory that we used as we were thinking about how to organize these relationships between the workers and machine learning tools. So first, we looked through the emancipation literature in IS and came up with a list of characteristics that have been deemed oppressive, and then also thought through and looked for characteristics in the literature that are emancipatory and tried to match those. And so we found this list that in an oppressive dynamic, you have bias and you have constrained thought, stereotype-driven role assignments, strict role adherence, and rigid social structures. Then there's also a problem with this tendency towards oppression. It's an inertia, and it's just a natural tendency, according to critical theories, for relationships to trend towards oppression if there's not an active struggle against that. Ambivalence or fear are also indicative of oppression. Also, when a relationship dynamic keeps you stuck in the past or the present and is very reactive, that is a problem. So looking at the emancipatory corollaries to those, we want to see data accuracy, more robust worldviews, individual and collective self-determination, role experimentation, social mobility. And there has to be a struggle for emancipation where those involved, the agents, take ownership of this struggle and seek empowerment. And this can involve engagement with looking to the future and scenario planning to build the desired future. So this is what we're trying, the kind of the before and after that we're looking at. So this is a theory that was designed for people interacting with people, and we apply it to a context of people working with machine learning tools. And we find that appropriate because it is a theory of learning and these tools can learn. But if we look back on the history of the theory and provide more context there, it was developed by Paulo Freire and his experience as Minister of Education in post-colonial Brazil. So he observed that the oppressive dynamics that he saw there post-colonialization constrain the consciousness of oppressed individuals in probably obvious ways. So this seems like a common sense statement that most people would agree with, right? When someone is oppressed, it's going to limit their consciousness. They're not going to maybe be able to understand career opportunities that could get them out of poverty or how to enter those careers, or they're going to be constrained and blocked from seeing and understanding the larger societal system and how they could play different roles in it. What Freire said that's a bit unique is that the oppressors also suffer cognitive constraint due to oppressive dynamics. So it's not just the oppressed that are harmed by oppression, it's also the oppressors, because the oppressors get these distorted worldviews. They don't understand reality. They come to think that For example, their success is based on their superiority without understanding their dynamics and privileges they enjoy, or the value that oppressed individuals could bring, say, to their workforce or to their school. And so in this setup, in this framework, it's not that important who's oppressed and who's oppressor, or whether each actor can technically be oppressed or oppressor. It's just really important that there is an oppressive dynamic, and that oppressive dynamic affects everyone. It harms every part of the partnership or the community, and that by engaging with a more emancipatory process, you can help everyone involved and make the whole process better. So both the oppressed and oppressor benefit from emancipatory pedagogy as they learn from one another, because exposure to the other's knowledge helps them develop a more robust consciousness. So Freire explains how relationships between the oppressed and oppressors, or people living in a dynamic, an oppressive dynamic, can be organized to facilitate emancipatory pedagogy. So he talks about cultural circles, and this is a classroom dynamic that is created for learning that will lead to gradients of emancipation and more emancipatory learning for everyone involved to reduce those constraints on consciousness. So we read through Freire's book and identified 4 pedagogical processes for acting out emancipation. So this is us trying to classify his work into processes, because one of the praises of his work is that it is very practical. So looking from a process perspective, the goal is to work through the awakening of critical consciousness. There are also processes for enabling role freedom, also for instituting incentives and sanctions for accountability. This is another way that Freire departs from traditional critical theories, because generally critical theories, not generally, there are different schools of thought, but if you look at Latour and Trona, Heidegger, some of those people are saying, just let be. That's the phrase, let be. That, if something's not bothering you, just leave it alone, or everybody try not to bump into each other too much. But Freire kind of says that we're all bumping into each other. There needs to be some ground rules. And so he does call for incentives and sanctions where some, if there's an incentive or a sanction, it's not emancipatory. That's not true freedom. So that's something unique to this theory. And then the 4th process is identifying alternative emancipatory futures in order to pick one to build. So this is how those processes align to the oppressive characteristics, and which process we're hoping will be useful in converting that to a more emancipatory outcome. So we were coming at this originally from a design theory perspective, and then realized that if you're designing a socio-technical system, that's more of an organizing theory. So we thought about how can we design organizing principles? And similar to how one would, in a design theory, present design principles, we presented organizing principles or organizing processes. And so I'll walk through each of these 4. For each of the 4 processes we identified, then we talk about, we kind of name it and show how that process can be applied in a context where you have workers and machine learning tools partnering together. So according to Freire, the oppressed and oppressors are intertwined and in their biases and their constraints. But gradients of emancipation can be achieved as they learn from each other and explore each other's worldviews and basically get the data of past experience from each other. And understanding differences in that experience, which kind of relates to data, like what they have, what knowledge they have access to, can help with alleviating information asymmetries and lead to more robust and multifaceted interpretations or outcomes. So to organize for more critical consciousness, Freire suggests making facts or perhaps data visible through storytelling. And so when we think about the future of work in that context, we do know that users can constrain the development of machine learning tools when data is manipulated or withheld. So there are things that workers can do to constrain the learning of the machine learning tool. And we know that machine learning tools don't have access to contextual information, so they can't understand the world around them like the workers can. But we also see an emerging stream of literature that says, okay, machine learning mental models are being forced on workers. And even when they don't realize it, workers are coming to think like the machine learning tools that they work with. They're adopting those ways of thinking and those ways of problem solving. And it's ultimately changing their mental models of how they see their work. So we do see that machine learning tools and workers are affecting the learning and thinking of the other. So we talk about how you can bring in an emancipatory organizing process to go from a biased, constrained thought to more data accuracy and robust worldviews. And to do this, applying for these ideas, workers need to gain awareness about how they're constrained by machine learning tools, as well as how their actions are constraining the tool. And then they can engage in a version of storytelling by sharing data to reduce information asymmetries about the experiences of, or basically the data that's available to the other. So machine learning tools, for example, can engage in a version of storytelling by informating. And there's a lot of work that talks about how important informating is. And so we just kind of go a step further to say, this is why it's important, because you need this critical consciousness process to play out. So workers then can engage in a form of storytelling by providing data directly to the machine learning tools. So a lot of times machine learning tools or other artificial intelligence are picking up on trace digital data, and then there's this indirect storytelling, right? Like it sees your behaviors and infers how you want to behave or what you're like. But it's more emancipatory, we say, if a person can provide information more directly rather than through trace digital data, because how they're acting may not be how they want to act. And so that would allow them to more fully express who they want to be and how they want to be seen in the dynamic. And then workers should be trained for these processes. So we say workers should be given examples, for example, how data entry failures can constrain the machine learning tool's ability to develop robust models of thinking. And then the machine learning tool should be designed to accept inputs from workers that allow it to change. And it's really important that the tool can change in response to feedback and that the worker can see how it changes and that the worker can change their behavior in response to feedback too, so that there's some mutual learning and growth. So for machine learning tools, learning may involve the introduction of bias correcting algorithms, but whatever it involves, it should result in optimizing on more complex, multifaceted outcome metrics so that it's not a very specialized frame or mental model that it's being based on, but that more things are being considered. In general, that will be considered more emancipatory. And emancipation can only be achieved if all types of actors or actants, all the agents in the relationship are able to develop critical consciousness and change in response to learning. So we know that machine learning tools are affecting workers and that workers learn and change in response to them. But the implication of this organizing process is really that we want to see the machine learning tool change in response to the workers' feedback as well. So our second normative process is that we want to see enabling of role freedom. So Freire talks about in his education context that teachers and learners should have fluid roles. There's not, an oppressor teaching the oppressed and depositing knowledge, but rather everyone's talking to each other and learning from each other. And filling diverse roles is important because it brings new perspective and new understanding of the roles, but also the social networks and the societal institutions and perhaps organizational processes, things like that. But there are barriers to role freedom that can be explicit or tacit. And we see this not just in education, but we can apply it to a future work context. For example, there are typologies of tasks and roles for humans versus machines, the human machines factors literature. And those are outdated in the age of machine learning. We see that there are benefits associated with role experimentation and applying machine learning tools and other AI in areas that you might not expect them to be good at. For example, art and music. We are seeing that machine learning tools can create beautiful art that really touches people and are really good at composing music in some cases. So there is room for them to move into roles we haven't seen for them in the past. But we also see a problem here where people are being constrained in terms of what roles they can fill when machine learning tools are used to profile workers according to these quantifiable dimensions. So saying like, oh, you have this IQ, you're going to be here. And this has become really common in the United States. I'd say in the past 2 years, it's becoming increasingly popular to give people lots of personality tests and IQ tests and aptitude tests and all of these things, and then measure them, quantify them, and assign them to project teams based on this. And they're having machine learning tools quantify and assign people to tasks, particularly as it relates to group work. So what we say is that if we're going to apply Verree's ideas, we want to organize where we go from rigid stereotypes to dynamism and dynamic role opportunities. So to promote role freedom, there needs to be a process through which workers and machine learning tools can experiment with different roles over time. Now, this was one of the more challenging organizing processes to relate to a work context, in my opinion, because we do know that there are constraints, a lot of constraints there in terms of putting machine learning tools into a new role. But the benefits of role freedom are really great. And machine learning tools do provide value in their ability to profile workers, but the benefits of these profiles are optimized when workers really know how they're profiled, and they're encouraged to grow into new roles and experiment with other roles. And it's not a strict or stagnant thing where they don't know how or why they were profiled in a certain way and stuck into the box they were stuck into. We know that reduced role constraints can facilitate feedback about challenges associated with each role too. So we see this in the management literature, that it's people who are not particularly predisposed to excel at a certain role often are able to point out what's wrong with onboarding or training processes. So there can be advantages there. As diverse role exposure contributes to greater insights, then workers can make more informed decisions about roles they are good at and roles they enjoy. So just to be clear, what we're proposing here is that things that are normally done by workers, we need to try to find ways to use machine learning tools to do those tasks and roles. And then we also need to find ways to let people, workers, go through the tasks and roles that are normally done by a machine learning tool. Now, if a role is overly tedious and a worker doesn't want to complete all these tedious tasks as a machine learning tool usually does, then there are opportunities for workers to, for example, look through worker logs or look through machine learning logs to see what the machine learning did and go through step by step and see what it did in certain cases. And this allows process exposure, because the goal isn't that someone sits there and does the tedious work. The goal is that they understand how the work is done, what work was done, why decisions were made, and how larger processes within the organization work. We also say that machine learning tools should be able to experiment and transition across roles. So this is the most challenging one, because it means that machine learning tools may be assigned to tasks for which they were not originally designed, and they have to be modified for that. But you know, when workers apply ingenuity and creativity, they can find ways that the machine learning tools that are designed for one role can be applied in a different role. The third process is instituting incentives and sanctions for accountability. So according to Verree, freedom and authority have to be balanced, or one will dominate. If you have too much authoritarianism, you're not going to have freedom, but denial of any authority leads to licentiousness. So there needs to be some balance there, and that balance has to be managed. And not everyone and not everything is willing or capable of acting in good faith, right? Like a machine learning tool cannot act in good faith. But freedoms without accountability will be abused because there's not perfect good faith. So a struggle for emancipation is always going to be needed, but it should not be confused with a struggle for domination. So something that Freire is very clear about is that you don't want to just take the oppressed and oppressor roles and reverse them. You want to find a way for there to be a more neutral power dynamic. So applying these ideas to a future work context, we say that flawed attempts to promote authority will involve complex and, or we're already seeing complex and interconnected technologies that surveil and monitor workers to control them. For example, we see workers having to wear wearable devices like at Amazon. They have devices on their wrist to see how quickly they're sorting packages and things like that. And so that's an example of big data being collected and fed into machine learning tools to control workers. Human scrutiny is needed. And then another issue that we're running into in work context already that is likely to get worse in the future is in biomedical research, because they are using machine learning tools to prescribe recommendations. So in particular, there was a case where ovarian cancer data sets were used to train a machine learning tool to look for things that were specific to the patients or specific to the treatments or lifestyle so that they could make recommendations. But then when they got more data and brought in more data sets, they realized that the medical recommendations they had been making to patients were not based in anything except bias in the data on which the machine learning algorithms were trained. And so there were baseless medical recommendations being told to cancer patients when perhaps those efforts could have been used on treatments that actually work. So there are issues already where there's not enough human oversight or there's too much machine learning control. And that dynamic can go either way, where we're really crushing the potential of the machine learning tool or where we're completely dismissing the workers' knowledge and contributions. So as we think about how to apply Freire's ideas, we say, let's go from timid ambivalence to an empowered struggle for emancipation. So complete human control is only possible when machine learning tools and all the bright possibilities that they bring are done away with and excluded in favor of code-based systems. And that's neither desirable nor possible, right? So rather than dominate AI or be dominated by AI, workers can develop guidelines for governance to ensure an equitable partnership is incentivized. Emancipatory governance processes that establish worker protections and a more bounded use of machine learning tools can help with enforcing this balance of freedom and authority. And workers who take the lead in developing governance policies then are going to need to scrutinize their own motives and consider what is emancipatory, but also what is realistic. So Freire talks a lot about how sometimes when someone is an activist and they're really trying to change the world, that they get so caught up in these bigger ideas that they can't compromise or settle. And so it's important to think about what is realistic. And because the tendency towards oppression is an ever-looming threat, a governance process to counter this tendency through very structured and systematic action is needed. Finally, the fourth process is identifying alternative emancipatory futures. And this is my favorite because it just offers so much hope. So to build an emancipatory future, we have to imagine a world that Freire says, a world that is less ugly, more beautiful, less discriminatory, more democratic, less dehumanizing, and more humane. So there is this hope, but there's also a risk. There's a risk involved in building the wrong future. And so sometimes people think, well, I don't know, that seems too bold and a little scary, but constrained, timid imaginations that replicate the existing status quo structures of power are going to settle for suboptimal futures, according to Freire. So thinking about this in a work context, we see, dysfunctions so much in social media. We see that when things go wrong with a ubiquitous technology, they can go very wrong very quickly and with severe consequences. So it's not safe to not foresee oppressive outcomes. I mean, for example, a pedestrian was struck and killed by an Uber operator who was using their car in an autonomous mode. So this is a worker, an Uber driver, trying to partner with an intelligent technology, and things went wrong quickly when the human wasn't foreseeing the possibilities, or when it was used in the wrong way. So we need processes in place to move from a reactive past orientation to proactive planning and building a desired future. Now, machine learning tools operate on models that are informed by past data. So if we want them to be more future oriented, they have to be trained to ignore or abandon outdated data in some cases. And this is a functionality that is just now starting to really be used and understood better. But also more emphasis on forecasting and scenario planning is needed within the organization. So it's not completely a design issue for machine learning tools. There's very much a management aspect to this, that we want to see a proactive effort to build a more emancipatory future in workplaces. Search processes for detecting threats and opportunities are needed, and AI can help with this. In fact, AI have a really important role to play in building this emancipatory future. And then it's important to remember that emancipatory dynamics are built systematically. They're not born of chance. So workers aren't going to accidentally stumble upon emancipation. If machine learning tools are just implemented in an ad hoc basis, you will not come up with these optimal outcomes that you want. These organizing processes that really focus on emancipation are needed. People need to take time to think through these things in organizations during the adoption, but also throughout the process iteratively. Having an initial assessment is not enough because machine learning tools are dynamic. So ongoing efforts are going to be required to counter a tendency to go back towards an oppressive dynamic. So this is a thing where revisiting and iterative planning and changes to the organization are going to be needed. So you're probably thinking at this point, okay, this was not the typical research paper, maybe thinking this is a bit unusual. So how is it contributing to theory? What is it adding? And we are really trying to add to this conversation about technology and morality or ethics. So Latour posits that there is an intimate connection between technology and morality. And researchers have questioned whether humans have an obligation to treat technologies ethically. And they've asked, is it because technologies have rights or something like that? Right, but we want to contribute to that conversation by suggesting that, first of all, it's unusual that we say technologies can be oppressors, because this is a stance that's differs from the idea that humans can oppress other humans using technologies, but technologies can't be inherently oppressive. So this is something different where we're saying, technologies can be inherently oppressive because they have agency now, and they are outside the scope of human control in a lot of cases, and they're autonomous. So we do see opportunities for them to be oppressive. We also answer the call to move beyond human-centric ethical frameworks. This is something Introna has advocated for, to consider how ethics and emancipation can be pursued in networks of human actors and non-human actors. But notably, we don't do this because we think that machine learning tools have a soul, or that people are just objects, or some of those other ideas that have been thrown out there, but just really because we believe there can be obligations to a partnership. So we took this provocative position that ethics does extend beyond how one human treats another to also be how a human treats another technology and how technologies are treating humans. But that's because we see humans having an obligation to a work partnership. We think that there are contexts and scenarios where a person can have an obligation in a partnership because of the larger context and the larger implications of the work that they're doing. And maybe their loyalty to their employer or to society, things like that, not because we think technology has rights in and of itself, but because there is a partnership where obligations exist. So within that partnership, technologies can have rights and obligations, and so do workers. So notably, we are not advocating human domination. So this problem of oppressive AI and machine learning tools is a big problem, and there's been a lot of response to it. And one of the common responses is to say, okay, we need more human control, more human control. That's a common theme in this literature, right? So kind of Zuboff's theme seems to be, we need more control over these tools. But machine learning tools have an important role to play in building an emancipatory future. And we really see some potential here that they can be used in a positive way. I mean, if they can be oppressive, they can certainly be emancipatory too. So we call for organizing in a way that allows people, but also machine learning tools, to live up to the unique potential of each. So critical theory constrains us from our prior understandings, and it frees us from our prior constrained understandings and provides a different way to think about organizing, which can lead to a different type of organizing. So we're hoping that even if not everything in this paper resonates with all managers as they're organizing, or all researchers as they're thinking about organizing theories, that hopefully this starts a conversation about how emancipatory theory can be used to think through some of these things in our field. And the emancipatory organizing processes described in this paper then are intended to provide a framework for thinking about organizations and organizing and emancipation as these overlapping and interdependent processes. We want people who are thinking about organizing to think about emancipation as well. So how and in what context these processes actually leads to emancipatory outcomes is a question for future research, and we haven't gone into an organization and tried to make changes according to these processes, but that's something that we would certainly like to do. And we'd love to see more research that designs emancipatory systems and explores both the emancipatory and oppressive effects of technology, that we would really like to see more attention to these issues. So this problem of worker oppression is not new, right? But the technologies that are enacting and enforcing oppression are new, and they're enforcing it on a much larger scale. So new ways of organizing are needed to ensure that workers are not subservient to machine learning tools in future workplaces. So there are questions about oppression and emancipation that have always existed, and they're going to continue to exist. And some of those have been addressed by philosophers and sociologists. And then there are technical questions about what is possible. And this build it and they will come mentality is very common in information systems. But we really believe that information system scholars have that overlapping knowledge of philosophy and computer science to bring a uniquely information management perspective to these fundamental questions and provide more ethical guidance and more concrete strategies for dealing with machine learning tools. So we also advocate that existing organizing theories and processes and even design theories out there are not adequate, and more work is needed in this area. So hopefully some people reading this or seeing this presentation today will agree, and I'd love to see more work on this topic in the future.
Great. Thank you so much, Amber. Thank you so much for that lucid narrative. It almost brought a picture in my mind of a production line that slows down to accommodate a new recruit and then kind of speeds up once again once the experienced employee is working there. And it would amount to a lot of freedom that could be given to human beings. Professor Yogesh, your thoughts?
Nothing, just wanted to say thank you to Amber for such a excellent talk. And obviously we hear more positivist view and or maybe qualitative view, but here, you know, Amber has presented a very different orientation, a bit of design theory and that kind of approach. So it's really insightful, and particularly the kind of issue Amber has examined in this paper is something going to take really a dominant position in near future, where more and more machine learning and artificial intelligence tools and things being applied, will be applied by companies. And you already start to hear these kind of issues in media actually. In last few months, I have seen few of these kind of issues arising. So I just wanted to say thank you to Amber for giving her time and giving such a insightful talk. Only thing I would ask to elaborate, if you are manager or if you are in a position in an organization where such tools being employed and these kind of scenario may exist, what would you do? So some of maybe audience is MBA students here, and this might be a little bit helpful for them to understand that if they are in this situation, how they should be dealing with this kind of situation. So yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I'm just really happy to be here and happy that you guys accepted my paper, because I know it is quite different to bring a critical perspective to these things. But I think for managers, there are a lot of implications of this work. In fact, the review team had a lot of questions about different aspects of the paper. We were saying they could see a lot of practical implications, and we're working on a follow-up paper because we think that what we really want to see is managers training employees for how to work with machine learning tools in more emancipatory ways. So training them how to spot oppression, for example, how to spot a problem, training employees how they can interact with a machine learning tool, why they shouldn't be manipulating data, how that affects the whole process, and different things like that. So we actually have come up with four training modules that we're working on now that describe 4 different work contexts. And so those can be used to train employees, where you have, for example, a police officer in one of the narratives, and they're using a machine learning tool to decide which areas need more policing and how to schedule people who are doing rounds and checking on the community, and how to identify issues of bias in those algorithms that can lead to over-policing and misdirection of resources. And so then that can help, because, you know, when the algorithm gets a bias, then that bias can be put back into the worker's way of thinking. And then the worker, the police officer, may think, oh, these are the areas I need to go to. The machine learning algorithm keeps sending me there. And then it becomes a mutually reinforcing pattern. And so that's what we're working on now, is just very practical scenarios, training scenarios. Like, here's the context. And in real life, in this specific context, here's how the emancipatory pedagogy processes play out, because it's going to be so different for each work context.
Indeed. Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Before I go to the question in the chat box, Dr. Raman, any thoughts from your side?
It's already 7:20 for us. I think you can take the questions. Thank you, Amber Young, for giving your time to us. If we can have some questions from the audience, I think some of them already posted some questions.
Yes. So Amber, if I'll just pick up a couple of questions and share them with you. So we have a question from Ramesh Babu, who is asking, what is the role of AI in dealing with ethics in management?
Well, definitely I see a big role for AI because I think that AI can help us understand our own biases and problems that exist and help us identify problems, but also opportunities to do better.
Mm-hmm.
And then we want to make sure that we don't rely too much on them, but that we also question the AI tools because they don't have that conscience that humans do.
Okay, thank you. There's a follow-up question from him as well, where he's mentioning in older theories, I assume he's referring to emancipatory theories. So he says in older theories, where there is no mention of technology, do you think technology will play a key role in implementing those theories into practice?
Now, this is a great question, something that really interests me because I think that there are a lot of great emancipatory theories that talk about how people can interact with each other in a more emancipatory ways, but there's a huge opportunity for understanding how people can interact with technology in more emancipatory ways and how technology changes the process. So traditionally, these theories of emancipation just say humans oppress other humans and technology gives them more power to oppress with, and they're tools of power. Technologies are tools of power for oppression, but there's not a lot of emphasis on how technologies can be used for social good or emancipation. And there's just a complete disregard for the agency of the technology. It's all about people using them in this way as tools. But increasingly, technologies have agency, and that needs to be considered.
Thank you. Amber, in one of your, yes, Dr. Yogesh, please go ahead.
You first go ahead.
Okay. So Amber, in one of your slides, you quoted Frere, where you mentioned that teachers and learners should have fluid roles. And I was quite taken by that statement. Would you like to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, in emancipatory theories, he says this is not, he uses a banking metaphor, and he's like, this is not a bank where the teacher has all these coins of knowledge and deposits them into the brains of the students, but actually everyone needs to be learning and growing together. This is not, the student is not a receptacle to be filled with knowledge as we drop it in. The knowledge needs to be co-created. There needs to be exchange and dialogue. And it's not this set coin that you deposit. It's this malleable construct that you come up with together.
So I think what you're saying is that the student and the teacher need to mint the coin together.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. Wonderful. Yes, Professor Yogesh, please go ahead.
Yeah, Amber, until now, when we talk about ethics, our discussion is predominantly oriented towards what impact ML or AI may have on humans, right? But then there are other discussions also emerging. For example, especially if you take example of companion robots or some other form of robots, how human actually treat machine. And if there is a role of ethics and emotions and other things there. So have you thought about anything in that direction, means in opposite directions, rather than just how machine is treating human or having impact on human?
Yeah, this is something that I find really interesting. And I don't actually feel like, since machines are not people or living sentient beings, that it matters so much how we harm them. But I think that it's really overlooked the ways that we harm ourselves by being oppressive towards them. So I think, for example, if you lose your temper with Siri when your navigation gets off, that negatively affects you. And, if your children see you from the back seat yelling at your GPS, if you if you start going down these morbid paths in AI storytelling, then that affects your brain. It affects who you are and your humanity and your soul. Because what I think we do is we humanize these robots. And so it's not another person. You're not yelling at another person when you yell at your GPS, but you're thinking of them. The reason you got so angry at them is because you're humanizing them in your mind. You're thinking of them as a person. And when you are oppressive to something that you think of as a person, then, as Buri says, that harms the oppressor as well. It messes with your soul and who you are.
Deep thoughts.
Yeah, it's interesting because I can echo these. Sometimes my daughters, so we have Alexa and Siri, so they try to pose same questions that, for example, Siri, I'm not happy with you. And you see, they get a type of response from them, and then they pose same question to Alexa, and they get slightly different type of, and it make you think that although they're machine, and you are saying certain things, is that obviously machine doesn't have impact directly, but you do have impact of posing those questions. So it's interesting kind of scenario. And so my last question, obviously, do you think there is a research opportunity here or not?
Oh, definitely. Definitely. These are the big questions that everyone's asking, right? Like, how does it affect people? I mean, and there's a lot of legal implications, you know, like, should we allow people to beat up robots, or, you know, the brothels and things? And we need to think about, are we going to let people just act any kind of way just because it's a robot? So a lot of big questions. And I would say, no, I don't think we should. We need to have rules in place, because it does mess with us when we are oppressive to something that we've conceptualized as a being, as a sentient being. And then we could go into asking questions about, like, the environment. Does the environment have rights? And then the conversation gets very broad.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks.
Indeed. So we are at the top of the hour. Professor Yogesh, Professor Raman, with your permission, shall we close our session for today?
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Amber, heartfelt thanks from our side. Really early in the morning for you, 10,000 miles across the world. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with all of us. Thanks to our co-hosts, Dr. Yogesh, Dr. Raman. Thanks to our dear participants who join us at various seminars. I would be remiss in my duty if I did not thank Mr. Rajesh Bagewadi and our IT team at SIBM Pune, who host each of our seminars. Last but not the least, we have a very hardworking students team at Symbiosis, SIBM Pune. We call them iSmart. So they have shot a few pictures of you, Amber. While you were speaking, allow me to share one quick screen here. Let me just quickly share this. I'll, of course, email this to you later on. This is a small token of appreciation. If you were to visit us, they would actually hand you the wooden frame as you walked off the steps of the stage. But since we can't do that, we are doing it electronically. So I'll share this in an email to you in a while. So thank you so much. And we have our next seminar on the 19th of May by Dr. Jack Spencer. And that will be on people-centered artificial intelligence. So I hope all of you can join us then. We look forward to continuing our discussions. Dr. Amber, thank you very much once again. Have a great day.
You too.
Thank you, Professor Bhattacharya. And Amber, again, big thank you to you for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.